Gerry Lopez has served as Chief Executive Officer and President of AMC Entertainment since March 2009. AMC Theatres was founded in Kansas City, Missouri in 1920. Today, the company welcomes over 200 million people to the movies each year in its more than 300 locations around the United States. Gerry is a dedicated member of our college's Strategic Development Board. How did the high standards and experiences in your early life contribute to forming this successful executive you are today?
I just remember from a very early age, from both my father and my grandfather, this idea, this notion, this philosophy, this attitude towards work and life that essentially said, do whatever you wish, whatever you want, just make sure that you are the best at that, whatever that is. Of course, they had their biases. They wanted it to be business. They, would have preferred that it be the family business that we built on the island. Of course, I was not to be, but once we left, the mantra, the philosophy, the attitude continued. To them, we owed that to ourselves, to the family, and to the country that adopted us, that had opened its arms to us. So they always had this idea that I'm very fortunate they passed on about whatever it is that you choose to do. Do it with passion and do it with excellence. For the last 30 some odd years of a career and 50 some odd years of a life, I've tried to let that thinking and that philosophy flow through everything that we do.
That's really interesting. So some of this is a family perspective, and then some of this comes from growing up outside of the United States and then coming here.
Yeah.
How do you think that aspect of your life experience has affected your perspective as an executive on globalization, global marketplace?
First and foremost, it gives me a perspective that is perhaps somewhat different than someone who grows up uniculturally. The notion of, hey, we don't have all the answers. Hey, other people have something to teach you. Hey, good ideas come from anywhere. Bad ideas come from anywhere. The fact that you learn to weigh the content and the delivery and the messenger kind of separately, and of course together. But you learn to separate the person from the message, from the way in which the message is being delivered. I believe the ability to do that, the ability to be open-minded, the ability to react independently to those three things comes from having grown in another culture, in another language, comes from having left our own home country and having to learn to be accepted and having to learn other norms. Everything is approached as a learning experience, and that I think kind of at the very beginning opens your mind up to try and figure out things rather than passing judgment right away, and it's helped. Not gonna sugarcoat it. It has absolutely helped in terms of keeping an open mind and learning. Does not preclude opinions being formed. Does not preclude decisions being made, does not preclude strong biases. Hopefully it makes all of those somewhat better because they're arrived at in a more thoughtful manner.
Let's talk about one of those learning experiences that I had the chance to hear you describe, which was the very unique and historic sale of AMC to a Beijing-based private equity firm, Dalian Wanda Group, for $2.6 billion. You shared that story with our students back in real time, which was incredibly interesting. So looking back at this particular global experience, what do you think the impact of this sale was on the company and on your industry sector?
Well, it was the sale to Dalian Wanda was a journey. We had, at that point, the company had been owned by private equity interests for the better part of 8-9 years. They were looking for an exit. That's what private equity guys do. We'd explore any number of options and alternatives. Dalian Wanda had global aspirations. Huge company based in China. Their primary business is commercial real estate, but they play very actively. In fact, they are the largest cinema operator in China. Our being available for sale, essentially, by a private equity owners gave Dalian Wanda the opportunity to not only branch out of China, but to in the way and in the transaction coming together, it allowed them to become the #1 cinema exhibitor in the world on a combined basis. For us, it was historic, not only for the company, but also in the relations between China and the U.S. At the time, it was the single largest purchase of a U.S. company by any Chinese entity. The fact that it was a private Chinese company, not a government entity, made it even more significant. So we were able to blaze some trails in that regard. The way that the deal came about was because not only were they interested, but our approach to their interest was very open-minded. They were long-term strategic buyers. They were not money people. They were not financial people. Of course, the numbers have to work, and of course, the price had to be right. And those elements are they're not dismissed or ever forgotten. But it was much more than that. There were many who were nervous about it. There were many who, perhaps not overtly, but quietly, were opposed to the idea. We were able to address all those fears. We were able to address all of the concerns. We actually wound up having a little bit of fun with the thing. I distinctly remember the first time that we were able to disclose a transaction to our employees in one of our town hall meetings. I put up a picture of one of the Wanda cinemas in China. And side by side, I put up a picture of one of our own auditoriums. As luck would have it, they use red in their color palette. And those two pictures side by side, I then challenged my own team to say, okay, so which one is ours and which one is theirs? And the fact is you couldn't tell them apart. Unless you knew, you couldn't tell which one was here in the US and which one was actually in China. And that gave us, that simple exercise gave us common ground. And at the end of the day, it was really about all of the common ground. They are interested in the same things that we're interested in. They are capitalists, in spite of what you may read in the paper. This was a financial transaction that has worked out very well for them. Essentially a year and a quarter after they purchased a company, we took it through an IPO, and they doubled their money, just about, in that transaction. So make no mistake, at the end of the day, the platforms, the things that are in common, what unites us, is far more important than what separates us. The language and the culture, sure, they're different. The approach to things, sure, they're different. But we both seek success, and we both seek to have that success shared with others. So it's been an interesting almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in a couple of weeks that I was in Beijing for the big announcement to the press in one of their headquarter buildings.
Yeah. So let's talk about that IPO. Just a year after Wanda Group's deal, you took AMC Entertainment public, raising over $330 million in the initial offering. What advantages do you see in taking the company public, and what made you feel that the time was right?
Well, the number of things. For an IPO to be successful, it frankly is not hugely complicated. Most things in business are not hugely complicated if you can distill them to the core. And the core in making an IPO work, we thought, continue to think now, 6-7 months after having done it, is first you need the equity markets to be relatively stable, or God forbid, even in an upswing. And at the time that we chose to go through the IPO, 2013, clearly the equity markets were in an upswing. It was one of the best performing years for any of the indices in a while, certainly since the 2008 recession. So you need the equity market performance to be good. Second, you need an industry that is in an upswing. And in our business, which is so dependent on content, on the movies themselves, we had a record-setting year in 2012. And as things were shaping up for 2013, we were going to have another record-setting year. It's not unusual in the movie business to have a record-setting year. Typically, you get 1 in 3. It's a record setter. What is very unusual is that you will get 2 of them in a row. And that's what we had in 2012 and 2013. So the equity markets were right, the industry was right, and then the third component is you got to have a company, the entity that you're actually going to IPO, performing well. And we were. We, along with the industry, had a record-setting year in 12. We were having a pretty good. In fact, it wound up being a record 13 as well. And the reason that we were doing well was not just because our industry was. I mean, that, rising waters float all boats. It's because a couple of years earlier, we had put in place a strategy that really began to gain traction in 12 and really accelerated in 13. That strategy, the most fundamental underpinning of that strategy is a focus on the consumer and the consumer experience. And we had set out to become what we call the customer experience leader. And so many of the things that we were doing were now out of the lab and out of the testing phase and into the implementation phase, that when they began to come together, held with a very good equity market, held with an industry that was overperforming, the window of opportunity for us to execute the IPO was too obvious to ignore. We always knew that we wanted to, at some point, go to the market and sell a piece of the company to the public. And the confluence of these three things was just tough to say no to. So we did use some of the proceeds, in fact, all of the proceeds, to begin deleveraging the balance sheet, which is exactly what we had intended to do. So we were able to take the company through the process and execute what many have said to us was almost a textbook example of what an IPO should do and how it could work. So we're pleased. The stock has done well. It's back down, over the last couple of days, but that's the nature of the market. It'll be back up soon. We hope. We work towards that. So it's been a productive, very instructive experience. It's humbling to go to an IPO, but it's also very rewarding.
Well, I'd like to talk about a particular aspect of the IPO that's sort of an intersection of this customer orientation and your strategy, where you included a unique offering to your loyal AMC customers. Can you tell us about that and tell us why you did it?
Like so many things in life and in business, it starts with a personal relationship. There's a company called Loyal3. They're in San Francisco. Historically or traditionally, they had been a loyalty marketing company. They are branching into this new area of business, which is making securities, making equity, making stock in companies available to people, not in the traditional way of a brokerage perhaps, but actually through loyalty programs. So it's a very unique approach. One of their board members happens to be a friend. So when these folks first approached us with the idea, they heard that we were doing the IPO, and so they had a pitch, and of course you get approached by any number of people when you file for an IPO. The fact that there was a personal connection kind of caught my eye. So I listened to a friend, who was on the board, a fellow CEO of a telecommunications company back in Connecticut, and she said, "No, you should talk to these guys. They got an interesting business model." So we did, and once we understood it, we immediately said we got to be able to do this. The basic idea was to offer all of our loyalty club members, the AMC stock members, the opportunity to buy into the IPO at the same price per share that any major investor could have. If you know anything about IPOs, you know that the people who buy at that IPO price tend to be the huge investors. In fact, most of them tend to be pension funds and really big investment pools and things of that nature. There's also a few individuals. Some companies have what's called a friends and family program, where even if you're not a big investor, but if you know somebody in the company or you're a family member, you got some sort of relationship. It's all good, and it's great, and it's a time-honored way of doing things. We thought that although that was interesting, it was a better idea to open up the circle of friends and family, not just to indeed friends and family, but to all of our loyalty club members, all 2.6 million of them. Many took advantage of it. Some are happy shareholders. Many email me. I keep reminding them that so long as the price of the stock is up, they owe me at least a cup of Starbucks or something. And many have responded that way. It was tremendous fun because it allowed us to take a very special event in the company's history down to the individual customer level, and got some good press for it. And it was one of those things that kind of puts a smile on your face when you when you have the opportunity to do something that is a little different from what everybody else does.
This innovative approach you took to engaging your shareholders during the IPO is really one of many examples of pioneering new approaches that you all have undertaken that really seem to be core to what you do here at AMC. Can you share some of these innovations, things like big sound, big screen, other approaches that you all are taking towards innovation and what your long-term vision is in this space?
Innovation is not a one-time event. Innovation is not a word or an idea that an individual can walk in the front door with and make happen. Innovation really needs to be an attitude and a way of doing business that one can bring to a company, but it needs to be embedded. For us, it became about challenging the conventional wisdom, first and foremost. Perhaps the most notable of the innovation, certainly the one that's received the most attention, and frankly has produced the best results of all of the things that we've done, is this notion of remodeling and re-equipping theaters with recliner reseats instead of building new buildings. In an industry like ours, which is so well known and frankly mature and overstored, as many other industries are, it struck us economically that it was a better idea to drive the productivity of the existing assets and the productivity of the existing customer visits, rather than putting up new assets or striving to get many more customer visits. Of course, we're going to do a little of that, but with such a big installed asset base, and we already had 343 buildings, 342 buildings. We already have 200 million customer visits a year. We knew that the productivity of the buildings and the productivity of those visits had a lot of upside. We struck on this notion, my team did, of taking an old theater and instead of repainting and maybe perhaps some new carpeting, which we do and it's fine, we maybe needed to do something a little bit more dramatic. And what we did in this facility, which was coming up in its 20-year lease expiration in a little town called Lakewood, Washington, about an hour south of Seattle, is we essentially stripped the building bare of all of its seats and installed recliners. The big news on that is that in the process of doing that, you remove 2/3 of the seating capacity. And in essence, in an industry that for 95 plus years, everything has been driven by quantity, the number of buildings that you own, the number of screens inside of each one of those buildings, and certainly the number of seats in front of those screens inside of those buildings. We were now saying, that just doesn't matter. The number of seats is just not that important. More important than the number of seats to the economic welfare of the company is going to be the quality of the experience that you provide in each one of those seats. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody had ever focused on that. Nobody had ever chosen to explore in that space. We did, precisely because no one had ever done it. And did the first one, and it was a runaway success. Literally within 2 weekends of the theater being remodeled, we saw attendance trends that were nearly twice what it had been before. It was great. We thought, well, maybe lightning struck once. So we did a second building, all the way over at the other end of the country, actually in Binghamton, New York. Not one of the biggest cities in the state of New York, but we had the opportunity. We had a theater there that had been damaged by a storm, and that we needed to obviously fix and do something with it. And so, well, instead of doing the traditional thing, maybe we do what we did in Lakewood, Washington, which we by now dubbed the miracle of Lakewood. Literally, in the company, the whole thing was being called MOL. And the first time I heard it, I said, what is an MOL? I said, Miracle of Lakewood. So we did the MOL in Binghamton, New York, and it worked just like it did in Lakewood. And we said, well, okay, so maybe we got lucky twice, right? It happens, maybe we're living right. In fact, we did it then a third, fourth, fifth time. We're now up to 37 of these buildings, and the results are very consistent. In fact, if I was to stand up those 37 buildings as a separate chain, they will be the 5th largest chain in America. In the quarter that just ended in March of 2014, that 37 building collection would have been not only the 5th largest, by far the fastest growing. The attendance in those buildings grew 72% year on year in an industry that grew 5%. That's the kind of result that stepping out, that innovating can have on a big company like ours.
You said experience-driven when you talked
Yeah.
about how you anchor your philosophy for innovation, and you come by this honestly because prior to your work at AMC, you led experience-driven innovation at Starbucks as president of Global Consumer Products, and you've drawn a lot of parallels. I've heard you discuss this with our students between the customer's needs and interests in both product categories. At a time when a lot of organizations are looking to technology to lead their innovation efforts, why do you consider the experience to be the bigger opportunity?
I think because it's a differentiator for us. I think it's a differentiator that we've seen work in part because nobody else is focusing on it, and ultimately, look, our basic offering, a movie, can be enjoyed in so many different ways, right? From obviously our big screens to somewhat smaller screens at home, although those are getting bigger, all the way down to the iPhone, right? And a movie lives in so many different forms for such a long time, right? I mean, when they first open in our screens, that's obviously the very beginning of that content's life, but the movies never go away. I mean, you can sign up for Netflix, you can sign up for Amazon Prime, you can sign up on any number of services, and boy, there are movies there that are old, but there are classics that touch people's heart in a certain way, and people continue to enjoy them for years. That's all great. The experience, though, is the piece that we have a competitive edge over all of those other ways of enjoying a movie. I have continue to believe, and for a long time, I hope are going to make the point that what we provide is more than just a movie. And although we don't control the movie, we're not in the business of making them, we are in the business of showing them. What we do influence and what we do control is the experience that accompanies that movie. That's what we can do, that's what we can influence, that's what we can be better at, that's what we tend to be good at. And that part had been, frankly, forgotten by the industry. The advances in technology in making a movie over the last 20 or 30 years, none of them were evident or in any way replicated by the movie-going experience. The food at a concession stand 30 years ago and the food still at many concession stands today is the same. The movies are not, the technology is not, the food is. The seats were not at all changed. Well, we've changed that with the recliner reseats. All of a sudden, the experience of going to the movies is uplifted in the same way that the technology involved in making movies has been uplifted. And people have reacted to that. That's what we've seen, the results that we've seen in the receipts. And look, ultimately, the truth is movie going is embedded in the American social fabric. I've discussed and argued, actually, this with analysts and many others. And my rock bottom comment is this. So long as 17-year-olds want to date other 17-year-olds, we stand a chance. So
we've been talking about your customer experience in the theater. Let's talk a little bit about what happens here at home in AMC. The company prioritizes diversity beyond a lot of other initiatives and is well known in the industry for it, for initiatives, things like the Focus program. You've talked to our students about diversity. You've been a really wonderful partner on a personal level and also on a corporate level with us. What benefits have you witnessed from prioritizing diversity throughout the organization? And for you personally, what do you see as the advantages and disadvantages of this strategy?
I don't understand how companies that are in the business of serving the public expect to understand that public unless they reflect that public. This is not rocket science. Okay? We're talking about showing movies here. In fact, so many businesses, certainly most businesses that are serving the public, they're not rocket science. You need to reflect, I think, for success, the audience that you're attempting to serve. If you're in an industrial area and you're dealing with curing cancer or putting men in space, men and women in space, perhaps that is such a special. I get that. But that's not what we're in. That's not the business of most companies in America. And reflecting the population that you serve makes such inherent sense to me that to be otherwise just makes, to me, just defies logic. So for us, it's not about, well, it's the right thing to do, it's politically correct, hey, whatever. I'm not particularly motivated by political correctness. In fact, many times a week, I'm reminded how politically incorrect I can be. For me, it's a business imperative. If we are indeed a major city circuit, and that's who we are and that's what we're known for, how can I have a management team that is not reflective of the major cities? How can I have a management team that does not include the people who I'm trying to serve? So I'm not doing it out of some altruistic, higher level mission, or anything like that, to the extent that it looks like it may, okay, and somebody wants to, write it up that way, I'm okay, fine. It's really not about that. For us, it's a business decision that is not only right, which it is, but it's a business imperative. Our team today is our senior leadership team, our theater management ranks are much more diverse than they have been in the past. I like to think that it's not so much because I'm here and I've driven it and I've made it a point of making sure that it is so, but because it just makes sense. You want people to come shop in your stores, and that's what our theaters are, our stores. And you want them to feel comfortable in those stores. They're coming at us for entertainment. They're coming at us to relax. It is just natural that when they come to our stores, to our places of business, that the people serving them reflect who they are. I cannot imagine how else it could be.
Let's shift gears for a second and talk about your personal innovation, innovating yourself along your career, some of the changes that you've embraced. We found an interview where you had said the biggest mistake you made in your career was being impatient and leaving an employer too early. Mm-hmm. And we're graduating young people, and you and I have college-age children who we are hoping will be successful and who hope will listen to us. And I have to hopefully impart good information to a whole group of students of this age. They are impatient, and we want them to learn from this experience that you had. What would your advice to them be?
Do not shortchange the fundamentals. And there's 3 or 4 of those that are really important. First, and maybe a cliche, but I'll say it, do not shortchange your values. And let's not be naive. There'll be many a situation. There'll be many a case where your values are going to be questioned, where your values are going to get challenged. Do not ever shortchange those. That to me is fundamental. Fundamental experiences in the chosen career path. Do the dirty work and do it early. Do get some dirt on your fingernails. Learn it at a most basic level. There is no substitute for getting some of those experiences early on in your career. I remember so many examples, but I remember when I first transferred from Pepsi Cola to Frito-Lay. Both parts of PepsiCo, both very successful companies. At Pepsi, I was a marketing guy. I'd been running some of the brands and doing some new products and learning about innovation in that system. I'd been there 5 years or thereabouts. Opportunity came up to go to Frito, and I said, it's the other part of the company. Why not? Except it wasn't in marketing, and it wasn't a headquarters where I had been with Pepsi. It was actually out in the field. In sales and field operations and so on. And I said, it sounds like a good challenge. It was in Washington, D.C., where I had gone to college, and my wife had accepted a position. So it all worked out on a personal basis as well. Except that I went from a very cushy office at Pepsi Cola World Headquarters to essentially a route truck at Frito-Lay. And I'll never forget my first job at Frito, my first day at Frito, where one of the supervisors kind of looked at me and said, "Oh, you must be the new Pepsi guy. Well, here you got all the answers. Here's the keys to the truck, go run a route." And I was kind of there like, okay, how do I do that? What I learned those first 6 months at Frito, by running a truck, running a route, learning how to run a district, learning the computer systems, learning it from literally the loading dock up, served me well, not only for the next 6 years that I stayed at Frito, but actually for the rest of my career. Because once you've had to handle some of those situations, there's nothing that you will ever face that you are not prepared for. I just completed an IPO, as we talked earlier, 5-6 months ago, and there were situations and there were moments in that IPO that I know I got through them, and I know I was better prepared to handle because of the work that I did at Frito-Lay 20 years ago, or even a Procter & Gamble, 6, 8, 10 years before that. It was those fundamental experiences that shaped my thinking and the executive that I have become. Shortchanging any of those would have been not only a grave mistake, but not a mistake that is easy to correct as you get later on in life and in a career. So do not shortchange your values. Do not shortchange that fundamental learning experiences. You don't know it all. We're older than a lot of the students, obviously, that we're sending into the world, and we don't know it all. No one that is 21 or 2 or 3 leaving college should think like they do. The moment you abandon the love of learning, you begin to die. Don't do that.
Totally agree. So let's give them some advice as they look towards their futures, right? Let's assume that they're patient and that they retain their values. From where you sit today,
Yeah.
what do you see as the opportunities for them, this next generation?
I think the opportunities are so broad and so wide, but they're underpinned. I think the key, let me try and say it this way, the key to unlocking these opportunities is going to be the attitude that people bring towards learning and change. Those two very fundamental ideas. Mentioned a moment ago, the love of learning. Do not, just because you left college doesn't mean you stop learning. In fact, you're going to go into training programs. In fact, you're always going to be learning. You're going to be learning from your peers. You're going to be learning from people that work for you. You're going to be learning from your bosses. You're going to be learning from other industries. The moment you stop learning, you're in trouble. Don't ever abandon the learning, the love of learning. Don't ever abandon that intellectual curiosity that brings you to ask questions. That allows you to step back and say, well, how can we do this better? That's deep trouble. So that's very fundamental. Work ethic. I've said it even to some of the Vesey Academy group that we had in here a few weeks ago. I said, if you wanted a 40-hour-a-week job, you're in trouble. If that's what you wanted to sign up for and you went to college for that, I hope you don't have a lot of debt coming out, because there might have been a misuse of 4 years and a bunch of money. It's not going to be a 40-hour-a-week job. You got to have that work ethic. The other piece is change. Any industry, I cannot think of a single industry that is worth being part of, where change in the last 10 years has not accelerated. And that I look forward to the next 10 years, every single industry that I can think of, change is going to continue to accelerate. If you do not embrace change, if you do not learn how to adapt to change, if you do not learn how to manage change or how to manage through change, again, trouble. So I think those three, the ability to adapt, move, and learn from change, the ability to learn, and a strong work ethic. If we can focus on those three, I think we'll be, most people will be fine. I've seen people succeed in many industries, in many fields over many years. Those three are always present. I've seen many people, unfortunately, fail. And one of those three, if not more than one, is missing.
If we look at this from the other side, I'm in the business of educating students, hoping to prepare them to be able to have the experiences that you're describing. What would your advice to us be? What would we as educators, what do you think we should be doing to maximize our ability to equip these students?
I think, first of all, I think Mizzou is under your leadership, John, just a fantastic job. I'm fortunate enough to be exposed not only to Mizzou, but to other schools, both because I'm an alum at GW and with a Harvard MBA, and my other son goes to USC, and we've had that conversation. But the point is, I'm exposed to a variety of schools because we recruit kids from there, because so many of my team have gone to other schools, and I'm actively involved in not only at Mizzou but with a couple others. And the work that you guys are doing is truly fantastic.
Thank you.
You should be very proud. The best thing that I think you can do and that you're doing and the better schools are doing is focusing on the marketplace. What are the skills that are necessary? what mental training is required. It's not just the subject matters, those are very important. I mean, we want accountants that know how to account. We want marketers that know how to market. We want management people that understand management, human resource graduates who understand the laws and the regulations and the trials and tribulations of the human resource world. So clearly the subject matter is of great importance. But beyond that, it is a way of thinking. It is a way of paying attention to what's happening in the broader marketplace. I don't envy leaders in the world of academia like you are and the things that you have to deal with. I read so much about higher education that is so depressing. Some of what's been going on recently here with some very distinguished and accomplished people being disinvited from doing commencement speeches. People don't really want to listen to what Condi Rice has to say. Are you serious? This woman is one of the most accomplished women in the history of this country, and we don't want to listen to what she has to say? In the world, when did that become acceptable? That 20 or 30 people can send a letter and say, well, we don't agree with her participation in some conflict or another. Well, tough luck, pal. Okay, you don't always agree with things that happen. And if that's a problem for you, you know what? Suck it up, because this is a person of tremendous accomplishment. Having to deal with those kind of pressures in the world of academia will drive me absolutely, completely bonkers. I admire you that do it. Through all of that, you need to prepare these students for us. At the end of the day, the private sector, not government, not not-for-profit, the private sector, big, small, medium, and in between, continue, I think, last time I checked the numbers, continue to be the single largest consumer of your product. Focus on what that consumer needs. That, not because I'm part of the private sector, I have been, hope to continue to be, but because that's where these students are going to achieve success. The success of our country is largely dependent on how well prepared these students are when they hit us, and how well prepared we are to accept them. That role that higher education singularly plays in our society is critical, and to allow some of these other influences, frankly it's disturbing. And one of the things that I so like about the schools in the core of the country is that we seem to be able to filter out that line noise a lot better than some of the schools on the coast. Because interestingly, how some of these issues that surface in schools on either coast, but not in the core of the country. That is a competitive advantage that I know when I talk to my friends in New York, in the financial world, or in LA, in the entertainment world. I know that is a competitive advantage to the core of the country that we are increasingly being recognized for. Hugely important.
If we were to roll back from what you've suggested to students entering the marketplace, and if we were to flip the advice you give us as educators and look at a student who's beginning their education, what do you think that student should do with the opportunity that the education offers in order to be ready for all of these challenges that are likely coming?
Think of it exactly as you described. It's an opportunity. One of the cancers that I see in society, that I see in some of the younger people, it's this sense of entitlement. You owe me that. No, we don't. We really don't. Okay. This idea that somebody has to do this for me, or I am owed this or owed that, or I am owed this privilege or this access. No, we don't. I got news. We really don't. In fact, it's almost the other way around. And although I don't want to drive home the point that you owe society, because that sounds, kind of cliche and so on, what I would say is, look, it's an opportunity. You can choose to do with it as little or as much as you want, but it's really going to be up to you. I've had many jobs for many companies over the course of a 30-year career. I was always the most challenged and I always learned the most from my toughest bosses. Not tough because they screamed. Those guys were jerks. I had some of those. They were tough because they were demanding. Because the moment that I thought I had done the best that I could, they would pat me in the back and say, yeah, and you could have done better. And then they took the time to show me how. The first time, I started my career at Procter & Gamble, the first time that I sold a Tide display to a store, my supervisor, I was so excited, I called my supervisor and I said, I sold my first, it was my first week on the job, sold my first Tide display, and his reaction was, that's great. Do you use the promotion allowance to sell it? And I said, of course I did. It's this promotional allowance, that's what it's there for. His reaction was, well, call me back when you sell one without the promotion allowance, because it's unclear to me whether you sold it or the promotion allowance sold it. And I thought he was being such a jerk. But the truth was, he was right. And he was nice about it. He didn't scream, he didn't holler, none of that. He just asked a very straightforward business question. So did you sell it or did the promotional allowance sell it? And he made me think, and he knew he could do that to me, because he made me think. And I said, well, that's a damn good question. Harsh, but damn good question. And in the end, it wasn't really even that harsh. But he challenged me to think analytically in a way that I don't think many others would have. It was an opportunity to learn. And I could have taken that very specific situation and been very disappointed with him, in the company. I could have gone sour. I could have felt entitled to a recognition that I had just done something right, which was right. Instead, it was an opportunity to learn. It worked. I learned something from it. 30 years later, I still remember that conversation. Tells you something.